Thank you. It's obviously I can't see you all, but it's great to be here with you all virtually. Hope it's as beautiful down there as it is up here in Sheffield, where I'm looking out on fabulous blue skies. But my name's Wayne Hoyle. I didn't know pretty much anything about psychogeography until the last few months, and I'm going to explain how this project came about. Basically, we held something called to celebrate Vulcanalia a couple of weeks ago on the 23rd of August. Vulcanalia was used back in the day, used to be a celebration or an offering to the Roman god Vulcan, where people would set fires outside of cities that Vulcan didn't kind of spoil crops and things like that. And if you can just see at the bottom here, that figure that's on that kind of orb there, that's actually Vulcan, who's been associated with Sheffield for many years, actually being described as a protector of Sheffield. So that's kind of where the starting point came. But if we can just go to the next slide, and I'll sort of explain the context, and I'll take you on almost a virtual tour of the walk that we did. I don't know if we're answering, if I can answer questions or anything like that, but if there's time at the end, I'd be more than happy to. But the reason I've got this, it's a poem. I'm not going to read it out to you, but I'm sure some of you are aware of something called randonauting or randonautica, which was something that really took off around lockdown. It was, first of all, quite a big internet community where people would basically be set what would seem to be fairly random coordinates that you'd set them within a certain radius, and the idea is that you'd go on a mindful walk and hopefully utilize that walk to kind of break out of your everyday routine or reality tunnels. So this was back in, I think, sort of early 2020, and I was quite curious about it. And there's actually an app now that you can utilize to help you set an intention, and then it will provide you with this set of coordinates, and you'll follow them and lead it to again what seems like a random place. So again, skeptical, but I tried it for the first time and actually shared the intention with a friend to see what would happen. And very loosely, I just said I wanted a kind of magical moment. Though I was kind of experiencing some personal issues at the time, but again, it was a beautiful day like this. And it set me the most awful route up this huge hill in Sheffield. There's lots of steep hills in Sheffield in a way. And I thought, oh God, so it was, I'm not the fittest of people, but I ended up in somewhere called Parkwood Springs in Sheffield, which is like a wooded area. It used to be, it's sort of on top of where the ski village used to be in Sheffield, somewhere where I'd never been before. And it led me through this woodland. And it actually led me to this poem, which as you can see, is called, I think, Magical Garden, which, magical moment, magical garden. I'll take that. And it was clearly something to commemorate a relative that had recently died. And so, I read that and I was quite gobsmacked. And then and it was the exact coordinate. I can't describe how precise it was that it led me to this actual thing in the middle of nowhere. And then once I'd read it, I then kind of went through this kind of covering it. The whole of Sheffield was kind of spread out and amazing views. And it was kind of reviving a moment, really, kind of life affirming. So I sat there for quite a while to contemplate. So that got me into the idea of kind of doing this kind of meaningful or type walking and wondering about, really. So I've sort of experimented with it quite a bit since. But can we go to the next slide, please? And then that led me to this. So around the same time, I helped to establish something called Sheffield Arts Lab, which started out as about half a dozen neurodivergent Discordians, artists from lots of different backgrounds, wanting to get together to kind of, help each other and support each other in our various creative pursuits. It's actually based on a model that was very popular up and down the country in the late 60s, and there were probably 60 to 100 at any point. David Bowie actually said, in terms of he was involved with one of the early Beckham Arts Labs, he actually, held it very responsible for some of his success. So one of the things that we were looking, there was something up in the northeast at one of the other arts labs where they were putting on an artistic exhibition on the theme of liminality. So this, you can't see, it looks like a very blue sky there on this picture, but this was about kind of 4 o'clock in the morning. And so I set this kind of intention of liminality again. It gave me the coordinates and it led me to this point. It's probably about a 15-20 minute walk from me, where I live on Kelham Island, into the city centre. And it's actually a really interesting area, which again, I didn't know until after this point, really. But there's an area called Paradise Square, which is behind the Sheffield Cathedral, really in the legal district of the city. And I was intrigued by this alleyway, that's Paradise Square actually at the end of it. And it just had, I don't know, some sort of compelling quality about it. So I actually utilised and put this photo together, and it was successfully exhibited at an art gallery in the northeast. But what I learned was that Paradise Square used to be a kind of hotbed of kind of revolution from like the 17 and 1800s, and it's had a history where crowds would gather here and really kind of challenge authority, and that kind of really spoke to me. So that was kind of another significant moment, or a synchronous moment again, where a seemingly random walk had kind of got me to learn about bits of the history of the city. Can we go next slide? And then I recalled this picture that I'd taken probably about 12 years ago now. And again, you can see Vulcan atop City Hall. It wasn't an easy photo to take. I was actually had this kind of big swing ride in the middle of the city centre. This was quite high, and I was kind of going quite fast on these swings, but managed to get this photo of Vulcan on top of the City Hall. And again, it was just an intriguing moment, and I wanted to learn more about kind of why this kind of character was atop the City Hall. Next slide, please. And then, so this led to thinking about doing something around Vulcan. It led to understanding about Vulcanalia. This is actually Anthony here on the right with the mask. He's actually an eminent sculptor. He's a very talented person. He gets commissions kind of internationally. And you can see he really got into it, and he actually learned some fire tricks as part of this. And this is what kind of Sheffield Arts Lab is about. It's about encouraging us all to kind of get out of our comfort zone, to try something new. So Anthony was very quickly liked the idea of doing something around Vulcanalia or Vulcan. And the reason so we started to think about the idea of doing a walk involving Vulcan. And the reason it's called The Whole of the Road, there's obviously a nod to the Waterboys song, The Whole of the Moon. But actually there used to be somewhere in Sheffield city centre, it literally was a big hole in the road, like there's a roundabout, but then there was the bit underneath, and people in the 70s would remember going to look at this big fish tank down there, and but it got filled in, I think in the 80s or the early 90s, but a lot of Sheffield folks still reminisce about the hole in the road and visiting it when they were kids as well. So it is about thinking about Sheffield, because the other kind of context behind this project is that the city, like many other sort of towns and cities, is undergoing quite a period of transition, where the old high street and the kind of old shops are closed down. But actually, and there's a tons of roadworks as well, and it's not looking like a very pretty sight in Sheffield at the moment. But actually, there is this vision for how it's going to be in the future, in terms of, I guess, moving more from sort of commercial centre to being one more of connection, and actually, being that sort of people where live and kind of eat and drink and socialise, as opposed to just being the old shopping kind of centre that it used to be. But there's so much. So I moved to Sheffield in 2008 from Doncaster, and I absolutely love the city, but I do find that a lot of people who've lived there for a long time have this really negative view about the way the city centre is developing. So I really wanted to do something involving Vulcan where we actually looked, and we I guess feel a bit more optimistic about what the cities can be, to kind of acknowledge that it is a difficult sort of transitory period, but actually let's find out what's great about Sheffield. So we started with Vulcan, and what we wanted to do is kind of think about invoking characters or entities that are associated with Sheffield to help us think about how Sheffield can progress in the future. So Vulcan, and we associated each character or entity with one of the 5 natural elements as well. So clearly, starting with fire, is we did this was actually outside the town hall, and we were all very nervous. We had no idea what to expect and how it would be received. And what you can't see on here is that we very quickly managed to get a massive audience of very curious people who were kind of photographing and taking video. And basically this started with a bit of kind of magical ritual part, kind of theatre sort of thing, but wasn't overly kind of prepared. It was very much about sort of being spontaneous and responding to kind of the day and what happened. So that was a starting point. If we go to the next slide. And so this is Amanda, who's a primary school teacher. She helps look after logistics. We had a big speaker on this old wheelchair, and that's me with a microphone in my hand. I don't know why I'm wearing a disco ball helmet. I'm still trying to learn from that myself. I'm sure we could put some deep philosophical kind of reflection on it. We just kind of wanted to wear a disco ball helmet. But next slide. So this is us moving down. It's just where I mentioned Paradise Square, where that picture was taken. That wasn't far from there. But we another character from Sheffield's history is someone called Joseph Mather, who's described as a city's Georgian punk poet, because what he used to do, he was arrested and locked up so many times in the 1800s, and he would kind of create these kind of poems and songs about the local judges and about the local police, and he'd go around, particularly on a Friday afternoon, get really drunk, and when everybody was getting drunk, he'd kind of have these kind of raucous kind of poems and songs and really kind of sort of take the pee out of these sort of established figures of the time. And this is a guy who's slightly blurred in the background called Ray Hearn, who's an amazing kind of writer and singer. And what one of the projects he's done is actually sort of bring back the songs of Joe Mather and sort of bring them to life. So he actually sort of did a couple of songs kind of about rebellion as we went to this bit. And actually it was near where Joe used to live, on an area in the city called Cack Alley, which actually isn't there anymore, but this was an area that was kind of very close to that. So this was very much kind of the spirit of rebellion, really. But next slide. And then this was a really interesting bit. The lady you see on the left is kind of somebody called Lou Barnell, a really talented electronic music producer, but kind of got all sorts of interesting things going on. The building in the background, which is really interesting, that's actually where mushy peas were invented, which you believe. But it's a really interesting architecture. But what's also interesting is that underneath that, you can't quite see on there, it's where they used to have stables where horses were kept in the early 1900s. But in the First World War, I think the horses were sent to France. They were certainly utilised as part of the war effort. And actually, what they had down there was an elephant called Lizzie the Elephant, who used to help transport kind of machinery and steel and things around the city during the war. And again, Lizzie the Elephant's always been intriguing. It's not something that's really that well known in the city. There is actually a blue plaque on this building for Lizzie. So we thought, for the spirit of Earth, we really wanted to kind of invoke some wisdom from Lizzie the Elephant. And Lou came up with probably my favourite bit of this whole walk. It was quite emotive and emotional, and she very much compared the work and the value that Lizzie carried out, and compared it to sort of how we should be valuing kind of immigration and immigrants. And she did an amazing piece about that. So that was Lizzie the Elephant, who was Earth. And again, we went, particularly we decided to do bits a route around the city, which took people to the kind of slightly unexplored areas or places that people might not necessarily normally venture down. But next slide, please. So this is just us walking through. It used to be the area where the big market, Castle Market, used to be in the city. And again, it's not the prettiest part of the city by any means, but we really wanted to create that bit of a spectacle for people. And the guy in the red's really interesting, actually. We'll talk a bit about Dave, because Dave Lee is a guy in his early 70s, and he's actually a proponent of something called chaos magic. And I don't know, again, if people are familiar with that concept, and could spend all day talking about that. But it was really interesting to get Dave involved and certainly get his thoughts on some of the more esoteric elements of what we were doing. But next slide, please. So this is the old co-op building. Castle House. So again, it's where the market used to be in Sheffield until they moved to a far modern kind of custom built building for the market. And it is a very rundown area of the city that has problems. But what you'll see is that's actually Vulcan up in the air. So this was where we were thinking about air, but just behind here is where the old Sheffield Castle is being excavated. Initially, we were going to do something kind of around the castle. You can't actually get on the site unless you're accompanied, so that was an issue. But again, it's receiving a lot of money, and they're finding new things the more they excavate. And although they're not going to be rebuilding it or anything like that, you are going to be able to see some of the ruins. So we were just very keen about how we could create this interesting narrative about how the city's kind of rising in lots of different ways and developing positively. But next slide. And so yeah, this is probably about a 10-minute walk from where I live. It's a tiny pocket park, but it's again, a lot of people don't know about it. So this was kind of where we went walking towards for the finale. There was a bit of a marriage ceremony between Vulcan, and the person you see in the middle there is representing the old Celtic river goddess, should I say, Danu, because this is the River Don, and Danu has often been closely associated with the River Don. And again, lots of people have done very interesting, kind of quite mystical things around the river. And in fact, I think Jarvis Cocker once used to go once a year with some of the band members to kind of provide something or sacrifice something in the river. So this is where we kind of wanted to hold the finale. And again, although you can't see it, we did have lots of people on the other side of the river in office buildings and sat down. We were sort of looking on quite seeing what actually we were doing, and we weren't quite sure at the time, I don't think. But next slide. So this is towards the end. So we start again. We did some things with fire, and this is actually something that Anthony built in his studio that I'm holding that was set on fire. It's actually a magical sigil that we utilised for the day, and set that on fire. And we really wanted to do something quite interesting in the river. Initially, we'd sort of develop something where I could almost be seen to be walking on water. Unfortunately, due to the river levels at that time, that wasn't popular, but it's something that we might look at doing in the future. But interestingly, I can't remember what the next slide is actually. If you can just show me what that next slide is. Yeah, I mean, this is the final slide, but what you can't see on here, on the other side of this river, there's this huge modern kind of office complex. And it's actually one of the main processing centres in the UK for Home Office asylum applications. And would you believe, what I didn't know until we kind of started doing this, is actually called Vulcan House. So it was really quite, again, synchronous. And that's Anthony, where he managed to actually set the river on fire in honour of Vulcan. So I mean, that's it in a nutshell. We had no, so it has taken several months, believe it or not, because it's been lots of kind of wandering around the city to try and find out bits from its past and see if we could sort of thread some sort of cohesive narrative. And to be honest, I don't think we're quite there yet, but what was good about this is everybody got there, we all turned up, we all did it, we all kind of, you know, we were all a bit nervous, but we all felt really positive. And so what we're keen to do is kind of potentially make this an annual event on the 23rd of August every year, but make it far bigger and better, potentially with some funding to make it more of a spectacle. We actually take inspiration as an arts lab from something called Liverpool Arts Lab, which has been around for longer than us. And actually Bill Drummond and Jimmy Courty from the KLF are responsible for a lot of the work. And the reason we all met as kind of artists or individuals was after kind of going to some of their events. And one event, again, people may or may not be aware, that's held on the 23rd of November every year, is something called Toxteth Day of the Dead. And that involves a kind of similar walks and things like that. So we did take a lot of inspiration from Liverpool Arts Lab, but very much the idea is that, as I say, to make it bolder, better, bigger, and get it happening on an annual basis. Now we know that's something's possible, but also to develop it kind of, you know, each character, even do different routes and introduce different people as well. So that's the plan. As I say, I wasn't aware, particularly I had vague idea what psychogeography was, but as I say, I found this extremely rewarding and interesting, and we definitely want to develop it. I've also got an idea of something in the peaks, potentially early next year as well. But yeah, that's it from me, I think. I hope I haven't gone wildly off of time. I hope that's about the right time. I don't know if we're doing anything in terms of questions or at the end, I'm not sure. But
yeah, we'll save questions for the end. That's great. So please stay with us for the end. Thanks very much, Wayne.
Thanks for listening.
Almost exactly 2 years ago, I spent 4 hours between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. in the Canterbury Museum in Worcester, which has a reputation as the most haunted building in the county. I did this because, as a historian of the supernatural, I'm interested in supposedly otherworldly experiences and their interpretation. I also thought it would be spooky fun. I'm going to read to you in full the account that I wrote that night to record what happened. But first I'll say something about my intellectual approach and my methodology. And to do so briefly, I'm going to draw on first William James. James believed that perceptions of apparently otherworldly experience were part of human psychology. These are real and recurrent events that provide insights into our nature, irrespective of their supposed value in proving or indeed disproving the existence of the supernatural. And second, with reference to method, I drew on the work of Christopher Tilley, an archaeologist who sadly died earlier this year. And Tilley claims that researchers can experience for themselves the perceptions of other people by entering the physical spaces they inhabited. The investigator's body is the primary research tool, along with a notebook to record its various sensations. And so, equipped only with the camera on my phone and my notebook, I spent a night here in the commandery. I should say that I adore the commandery. As you can see, it's beautiful, and I always feel happy and welcome as I walk through its rooms. In fact, I was speaking there last week, and I experienced my familiar feeling of love for the place. Also, to explain my title, I need to say that one of the upstairs rooms, which the museum calls the Painted Chamber, was in the late Middle Ages a place where the severely ill were taken to spend the last hours of their lives. This is the dying room of my title, which I visited at midnight. So now I will read my journal. And also I'm going to show you some pictures taken at the time. It begins at 10:45. Ben has taken me through the building and opened all the doors. We spent some time arranging the lighting. Now there are lights on in several rooms, spilling illumination into many unlit ones. The result is natural and for writing and getting around convenient, but also quite eerie. The long corridor of 6 doors overlooking the garden is lit at each end and dark in the middle. The wing above the canal is similarly lit. I've just walked the building for the first time. It is profoundly quiet, even so early in the night. The silence where I sit inside the library is enveloping. My mood is restrained but positive. I feel glad and privileged to be here. And now I have an impulse to walk through this beautiful empty building again. I'll take this book and pen with me. The next entry is from 10 minutes past 11. I have explored again the upper floor in the wing of the house containing the library. At the far end of the long corridor of doors, I wandered into unopened and unlit rooms. At first I ventured only into the first of these. Then I returned to try more doors and found my way to the stairs leading to the entrance to the Civil War exhibition. Walking through the unlit rooms was pleasantly unnerving. I felt myself drawn back to them with a sense of forbidden desire mingled with apprehension. Returning along the long corridor, I felt my pace quicken, impelled by the desire to recover the atmosphere of the library. And I've written in brackets, I considered writing the safety of the library, but that would overstate things. As I write, I am moved again by the deep silence of this room. If I were to get up and walk around, this would be broken by spectacular creakings of the floorboards. In the stillness, the silence is intense. It settles around me. It feels strange to sit in the deep quiet in an empty lit room and to sense the rest of the building around me. The next entry is 11:35. I've just walked out across the corridor and into the dressing up room and the Georgian room. The headless female mannequin in the latter is creepy. The room is lit. Perhaps this reflects my mood in the quiet and solitude of the house. I went downstairs and into the president's room. This had an edge of cold. Then I walked along the way into the dimly illuminated great hall and sat on one of the benches. I could hear the noise of bats or birds in the space above the room. I noticed a desire to return the way I had come to the library. There was a faint need for safety in this. I resisted this small tug and went back up the stairs into the long corridor overlooking the garden, then back to the library. I shall drink coffee, then I want to walk over to the wing overlooking the canal, so I'm in the dining room at midnight. The next entry is just after midnight. I'm writing in the lit room at the end of the wing overlooking the canal. I walked into the dining room a little before midnight and found a couch there facing the window. I lay down on it, reclining my head, and discovered a view of the cathedral. I was not relaxed. I could sense my body to an unusual degree alert. My heart seemed to quicken. I did not feel so much afraid as poised. I note that I wanted to lay there until midnight. The story of doing so held me there, and also, I think, a sense of the time. I did not want to stay longer. I could not have gone to sleep. In the moment this struck me, but I realised that I would be afraid to sleep. I looked around the room at the paintings, then back to the window. The view of the city and cathedral was reassuring. I looked up and I saw the painting of the Trinity. Now as I sit here, my mood is okay. It has an edge to it, and I'm aware that I want to get back to the library, or perhaps to walk around the building some more. Also, I noticed the pull of the unlit room beside me, a dare to myself. I feel an unanticipated desire to test my limits in this place. And the next entry is at 12:30. I walked back to the unlit rooms on the canal side, down the stairs, and briefly into the darkened warehouse room. Then back the way I had come into the great hall, more bird or bat sounds, and then out to the garden. From outside, the house looks eerie, with some rooms illuminated in the darkness. I walked round the garden, aware that I was holding myself in my body to keep safe. This sense was quite strong, also irresistible. On returning inside, I entered the Hamilton room and sat for what seemed some time in the silent, empty dark. Here still, I held myself, but more faintly. This is a kind of bodily clenching for protection, or perhaps flight. Now I am sipping coffee in the library. That feeling has dissolved almost completely, but still I am aware with faint unease of the rest of the house around me. And then an entry at 12:50. Still in the library. I've been browsing the books, for the first time doing something ordinary that diverts my attention to day-to-day activities. And I note in my mood a somewhat increased apprehension. I'm off guard, perhaps. I'm not sure if I want to read the poetry that I brought. I notice now a deep stillness, more pronounced than the previous silence, which seems distantly disturbed by the sound of cars or machinery of some kind. I've crossed into the dressing up room. Here the silence is deeper. The mannequins seem forbidding as I paced the room, catching glimpses of them also in the wardrobe mirror. I felt the sides of my face tighten and chill. The mannequins have hats draped on their headless shoulders. These especially seem malevolent. I feel a tightening and ripple in my neck as I write this, glancing across at them. I got up and looked more closely at them again. The effect is more intense. I feel a tightening in my scalp and stiffening in the muscles of my neck. And this is my last entry at 1:20. I've walked down to the entrance to the Civil War exhibition, stepping out briefly into the garden. Then I took a tour of the rooms. I sat for a little while in the unlit Royalist room. My sense of physical readiness eased somewhat, but remained. I took photos and tried to record the atmosphere and discovered a flash on my phone. The most affecting image is of the fully lit dressing up room. Silence has settled completely once more in the library where I write this entry. I can feel the beating of blood in my head. The coffee is pleasant and I feel well, though not completely right, and glad of my experience. It is when I stop writing that the soft pounding around the top of my skull resumes. Has my experience been pleasurable? Not really. Though the frisson has a trace of pleasure in it. More notable is the edge of fear, never strong, but almost constantly present. Also a sense of wrongness, of not belonging in these rooms. And of course, in a perfectly ordinary sense, I do not belong here at this time alone. The tingle of strangeness is understandable, but unusually forbidding. The things I look at around me seem not to want me here. That's the last thing I wrote. Now, I take from this experience various things, but I want to condense them into two observations. First, my sense of belonging in a beloved place had changed to a sensation of unwantedness and fear. And second, since I normally feel very comfortable in this building, this transformation was somehow related to the circumstances of my stay, specifically the solitude, darkness, and silence. Now, there are various ways to explain this, but time is short, so I want to resort to one explanation that appeals to me, which I take from the work of a man from Kent, Reginald Scott. I feel that Scott offers the most plausible interpretation. In 1584, Scott published a rather wonderful book, The Discovery of Witchcraft, which was in fact the first English treatise on that subject. Scott believed that people come to fear monsters, ghosts, and especially the devil because of the stories about them they imbibed in childhood and carried with them as adults. In particular circumstances, and especially on lonely nights, these fears were revived. And he puts it this way: some never fear the devil but in a dark night, and then a sheep is a perilous beast, and many times is taken for our Father's soul. especially the churchyard, where a right hardy man heretofore scant dare pass by night, but his hair would stand upright. So one thing I take from my own experience is that, as a right hardy man, who has always enjoyed spooky tales and scary films, I can, in the right conditions, almost believe in ghosts. Thank you.
Going to talk about how histories can and do proliferate and haunt cities. I will share thoughts and findings from a residency we undertook in Cardiff earlier this year. Here we utilised various methods: psychogeography, walking, conversation, and mapping to explore the palimpsest of past histories connecting to and influencing current place. Okay. So we have permission to play. A group of 6 international artists who are interested in working with public space. We create playful work which encourages ourselves and others to be curious and rethink these spaces. We draw from our individual practices to create a multidisciplinary practice as a group. We are Phoebe, Lou and Netta, who are not at the conference, and Tricia, Rick and Jenny, who are. We're based in England, Greece, Germany, Wales and Canada. We met in 2020 during an online live art development agency residency exploring public space, and decided to found our own collective, which has been morphing ever since then. Some of our notable projects have been running detour walks for Fringe Arts Bath Festival in 2022 and 2 Four Nations funded residencies, one of which was in Cardiff this past July 2024.
Hello, I'm Jenny. I am based in Neath in South Wales. My pronouns are they, them. I'm an interdisciplinary artist who does all sorts of bits and bobs, but my interest in public space is anchored in like unseen, unspoken rules we abide to, often without even knowing. I also do enjoy finding and sometimes leaving odd things in public space.
Awesome. Hello, my name is Tricia. She, they are my pronouns, and I'm from Montreal, Canada. These are my notes on my phone. I'm not checking social media, just to clarify. And my practice is rooted in walking, sensory engagement, and overlooking aspects of public space, such as vents of buildings or debris or other things like that, that we often are trained to not see or kind of just ignore as points of curiosity and storytellers of place. And I use these elements in making counter maps. And for example, I'm leading a workshop tomorrow to do that sort of thing. So some people may learn more then. Yeah.
Okay, I'm Rick, he or they pronouns. I'm based in Berlin. I spend a lot of my time exploring spaces and places and considering how through it we can play, learn, connect, share, challenge, change, and much more. I do this through various solo, community, and group walking projects. I also link all this in with self-publishing, making various zines, books, and collage. Okay, is this me again?
Oh, no.
It's Jenny.
So we will talk a little bit about what we did in Cardiff and some of the histories that we uncovered there. We'll also pose your questions, keep you on your toes, and explain why we're interested in these layered histories. So Cardiff, we chose Cardiff because it's a city rich with histories, and as a group we have various relationships with the city. So some of us had visited, others had lived there in the past, for some it was a completely new place. We chose the Canton area of Cardiff, and that was our base because we had a connection we developed with Chapter Arts Centre, which is located in that neighbourhood. So why the project? What were we curious about? We wanted to uncover histories and places of interest for people we encountered in the area. We were curious about how these histories influenced where locals rest and play in Canton. And it was also an opportunity for us to work in person with one another and explore the intersections of our own practices as well. So one of the methods that we used was collaborative mapping. So we set up a station outside Chapter Arts and asked people to contribute to the map by drawing and writing places of personal significance to them in their neighbourhood. So sharings ranged from physical places, sound, stories, experiences, thoughts, snippets of personal and community history. So the map is down here, if anyone wants to come and have a look at any point. So we also invited people to play dominoes with us as a way of breaking the ice and share personal experiences of access to play or not in public space. As a group, we use play as a method of breaking up routine and finding new avenues into conversation and connection. So we also facilitated a walking tour of Canton. This touched on some of the places and histories that people had shared with us, talking about the area and inviting people to engage with prompts, which are succinct invitations for action or actions, which curiously encourages curiosity in and rethinking of public spaces. Our route was varied, taking in community hubs. So we started at Chapter Arts Centre and passed the local library. We also walked the main road, residential areas, and a park. So what did we do in Cardiff? So some of the prompts we used during the walk, as you can see up here, were to leave playful invitations for other people to find in public space and to enact a new statue that you would like to see in the park. Other prompts included inefficient mapping, finding frames or something that could act as a frame to look through, focusing on smells in an area, or we also did frottage. So we held a talk as well where we shared the experiential map and talked about some of our findings from the residency.
Cool. Now I'm going to jump in. So as you can see, we did a lot of things, but now we're going to focus on the histories that came up as we were having these conversations and explorations in the area. So a lot of people chatted with us about all sorts of things, but in terms of the histories, I'm going to share 3 histories that really stuck with us for a few different reasons. Statues, which are some are more controversial than others. In this space, there's a statue of Billy the Seal today. So there's a physical reminder of this historical story that and this creature that was there before. And thirdly, as I said before, Billy the Seal lived in a purpose-built pond. So it was an area of water. That pond is not there anymore, but what is a water play park for kids. And so thinking about how this element of water continues to exist and have significance in the area as a place for people to gather and spend leisure time together. So the second history is on the right here. You can see Chapters Art Center, and that is what exists there now. But previously it was a school in that building. And so we felt there was an important continuation of how this building initially held a school and children, place of learning, was now still a place of learning, but through artistic and cultural means. And then the third example here on the right, you can see Iceland. I'm sure most of us are familiar with this establishment. And And there was a couple who were excited to tell us about the history of this building because on the right, or on the left, excuse me, you can see this cinema, which is the same, is at the same location, same building, a little bit of adaptation, slightly. So historically, this location was a cinema, and now it's been changed to Iceland. And again, we thought about this as an interesting reflection on how entertainment was traded for consumption in this space, and how, although this site is still utilized by local people, it is now used for food and consuming things, which perhaps reflects on society's change in priorities. And so, moving right along, reflecting on these histories for ourselves, we were thinking about imposing this question of how past uses of spaces haunt the current and future uses of those spaces. And we saw three possible ways to us that seemed to resonate. The first was the practical way that these past uses haunt the space and haunt the future uses. So that being the design of the building obviously utilizes certain limitations as to how that building is going to be used in the future or currently. So as I said before, for the Chapters Art Center, that was a school before and now it's used in an art center, fairly frictionless transition there. Secondly is the memories or associations we have. So buildings or places for the community and for individuals often generate a certain association in our minds, and they can form a collective memory of the community of what was there. And so this, for example, with Billy the Seal is an interesting way that we associate water or creatures with a site in our neighborhood, and those associations can be slightly different, but we all kind of hold that memory or idea of that place. And then thirdly, potentially a little more ephemeral, a little more wild, is how we can be unconsciously drawn to a place, perhaps resonating with your presentation, thinking about how a site or a place kind of brings a sense of calm or a sense of like being connected to something larger. And so, for example, if you visit the forest, which is where you kind of calm down, or you go to a castle and you feel like, I don't know, connected to the knights that'll be running through the I don't know what happens in a castle. I'm not from a place that has castles. But yeah, so thinking about that kind of more ephemeral element. And now I've been talking a lot, so we're gonna, I think we have a minute or so to, okay, we have half a minute to pose to you guys. If you have, so erase the word some. If there is any example that someone would like to share of a place in their life that perhaps has a past use that now haunts the current use or future use of that site. Yeah. Right here. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I was going to speak to out Sheffield in loads of different shops that like Superdrug and Monkey and there's loads of lost theatre histories, stories about lost tigers escaping, people being murdered underneath stages that really go into the bizarre.
So they like have these stories in the store. Oh no.
No, they're hidden. You have to look for them.
Ah, okay.
Like weird little plaques that
Okay. Cool. But there is, it's like shown in public. We have to look for them. Okay. Cool. Yeah, one more.
Ring roads.
Ring roads.
From the 60s to the 80s, loads of towns had ring roads put through, and there's roads that are bifurcated. A couple of weeks ago, we did an exercise in Huddersfield, a road that is now in 3 parts because the ring road splits it once, then comes down and splits it again. And you look back at the history of the road, because it wasn't originally one long road, it extended, in 19th century and so on. But these gaps where the ring road is and the ghosts of buildings that were there, and then you're back on the road again, and then it's gone again.
Right.
You're going through Tesco's filling station, and then the road's back there again.
Ah, so there's gaps because the ring road. Interesting. I'm gonna have to cut it there and keep going, but I'm sorry.
Exactly. So because we moved to Seaside Town 5 years ago, and there's this kind of we know about empire and all the atrocities that happened without empire, and it's almost like I'm trying to connect to the atrocities. And it's almost like an absence of haunting, and that's worrying as well.
That's interesting. Yeah. How do we tap into the hauntings? Yeah. Yeah. So, with that said, why? Why do we care? Why? What's the point of all this? It's an important question. Why are you laughing, right? What's the point? And for us, these hauntings, which maybe is what's missing where you now moved to, is they teach us how there are invisible forces that are influencing our daily rituals. They are threads that are connecting the past with the present and the future. And they remind us that this moment that we're experiencing is just a blip in a mysterious and unfolding story that's potentially very poetic, but I think it does speak to like this deeper resonance. Yeah. And that's it. So thank you all.
I'm the creator of All American Ruins, which is a fantastical multimedia travelogue where I recount my experiences exploring abandoned spaces across the United States and around the world. And I reimagine those adventures through multimodal storytelling. So it started as a blog, it transformed into this audio series, and what you're going to watch today is the Hudsey original docu-series. We'll be watching the pilot episode today. Along the way, my project asks questions about American history and culture, community and economics, the environment and mental health. But the biggest question I wanted to ask with the project is, how can we activate our imaginations as a tool for healing? Isn't this funny? I'm getting a call from the United Kingdom right now. There's a lot more we could dive into, but due to time constraints, I'm just going to let this docu-short speak for itself. The title is All American Ruins, Nevele Grand Hotel, which is a reimagining of my expedition to the 550-acre abandoned architectural Borscht Belt icon in the Catskill Mountains of New York. And just to note, and you'll learn about this, the Borscht Belt is an ambiguous geographical plot of over 100 abandoned Jewish resorts here in the US. But again, I'll let this film speak for itself. And if at the end of the film you're not quite sure how my work relates to psychogeography, you can learn more at allamericanruins.com. But without further ado, I'm going to share my screen again, and we'll watch the pilot episode, which is directed by my friend Angel Gates. Let's see here. Okay. All right, here we go. There was an abandoned dairy farm down the hill from my childhood home. As a kid, I spent a lot of time there, talking to ghosts, playing pretend, finding sanctuary in the past, even though it wasn't my own, which didn't matter because every time I went, I had this funny feeling that I'd been there before, and I felt safe because there, in that serenity, I could escape the harsh reality of the world, which I actually knew nothing about because I was a kid. And then it burned down, and the abandoned dairy farm was no more. And then we moved away, and I forgot about it. until one morning over 20 years later, exactly 1 week before Memorial Day of 2020, I had a dream that I was back inside the abandoned dairy farm. And in that dream, I had that funny feeling down in my stomach again, like I'd been there before. In that dream, I felt safe. And when I woke up, I wanted that serenity again. I wanted to talk to ghosts. I wanted to play pretend. I wanted to find sanctuary in the past, even though it wasn't my own. But in my imagination, it was. And I got out of bed wondering if there were abandoned spaces near me where I live now in the Hudson Valley. So I opened my computer and I did a Google search, and shit, they're everywhere. That morning, as I lock up my house and get into the car, the song starts to play in my head. It was up to you, but you should have gone to the Nevele. The car turns onto Arrowhead Road, and I begin to feel that funny feeling again. I know this place. I've never been here, but I know this final stretch of broken road leading up to the gates of the 550-acre property. A crumbling relic in the heart of Ulster County, New York, once a point of pride, now a point of pain for the community who's watched it decay before their very eyes since 2009. The Nevele Grand Resort. And so begins one of the first of many expeditions out across the country to find sanctuary inside these all-American. A security guard at the operating resort next door shows me where to slip through the fence. I thank her, maneuver around the fence just like she showed me, and I begin my approach up a long driveway towards a large tower. And the closer I get to the massive complex, it hits me. I feel like I'm on the set of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, the 1980 horror classic adapted from Stephen King's novel. I've been deeply obsessed with the film for a long time, one of those dorks who feels so mesmerized by the movie that it's almost in my bones. Kind of like that feeling of Anemoia. And so I get to live out that fantasy and chill with Shelley Duvall in 1980 on the set of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and it's incredible. But I know that it's more than that. The ghosts are clear. This place is a monument to a time before mine, to a community that isn't mine. Historically, an ostracized, politicized, scrutinized community, just trying to find peace. I drift past the threshold between the real world and into the late 1960s, amidst the decline of the Borscht Belt era, when Catskillian resorts of Herculean size and stature began slowly to lose relevance and economic steam. The Jewish Alps, as they were once called, have a dark anti-Semitic history. In the 1920s, anti-Jewish marketing was on a sharp rise in the United States, and many vacation spots across the country barred Jewish people access. This harsh reality led many Jewish communities to build their own vacation lands. And the allure of the Catskills, some 90 minutes from New York City, incited a resort revolution, becoming a destination for many Jewish travelers from the 1920s until the late 1960s, when tourism trends shifted and the Borscht Belt began to experience a steep economic decline. I guess I didn't realize it, but the resort is overwhelmingly large. Graffiti covers the walls, decades boasting intricate design work. The Nevele has a rich history in the Hudson Valley. For years, it served as a point of community pride. All you have to do is scour Facebook and read the comments from folks who have fond memories of the hotel. It's a maze. It drips and moans and breathes on its own, and I feel like I'm exploring an entity still very much alive. I head downstairs where I find the Stardust Room. I can hear Al Bowley, Ray Noble, and his orchestra playing old standards like Midnight, The Stars, and You. The music sails down the hallways of the hotel, haunting every nook and cranny, blanketing every wall with echoes of the past. And then I enter the theater. It's empty and enormous. 2 levels sweeping towards a modest stage where the curtain, musty and dusty, hangs on by the skin of its teeth. And I hear laughter. Laughter of the guests, applause, and the light coming through the windows is heavenly. I approach the stage, hop up, and I turn to face the audience. But they're gone. Only a single empty chair remains, so I bow to it. And a shiver tumbles down my spine. So I hop off stage and exit the theater. As I pass through the corridor next to the check-in arena, I see a giant open lobby where skylight glass has caved in and sunshine tumbles down from above. This space is not like The Shining, and it doesn't feel like there's a dark anti-Semitic past here. There is no evil lurking in the shadows, but there are ghosts in this hotel, and it is a sanctuary filled with a lot of joy. I wander back into the kitchen, passing messages, comments on culture, signatures of past explorers. It is exactly as I've described it, a blueprint of a moment on a timeline, sealed and preserved. Knowing that every building on this property might one day be demolished makes me feel sad. The floor is caving in. Mother Nature always has the final say. I make my way down a series of passageways that seem to stretch on forever and ever and ever, until I reach a delivery entrance at the back of the resort. On a wall rests a giant spray-painted message. I take a photograph. I want to remember the message. I breathe. It's a moment of gratitude for my own sense of serenity amidst the global chaos where so much is unknown. I feel the mountain air shroud my face as I wander into a giant barn that's filled with boxes of employee records, receipts, bills, invoices, marketing postcards dating back to the 1950s. Costumes from past stage productions, history, unknown history. Lives lived thoroughly of their own volition, just aiming to survive. In the distance, I see a giant structure made of wood. So I make my way across an expansive field, and I discover the ice skating rink. I can hear the grind of the metal on the ice as patrons whiz by. I slide out onto the rink, and I take it all in. I'm almost lost inside the fantasy when Shelley Duvall grabs me by the arm and motions towards another building in the distance. So I go back. I backpedal through the entire hotel, past the pool, past the elevators, right on through the muck and the mire of history. Room after room after room. And when I reach the other side, I see the building that Shelley Duvall was talking about. It's employee housing. The architecture of this building is different. I see Shelley Duvall running in, bat in hand, and I realize the roof is completely caved in. I look and I see Shelley Duvall run up the stairs to the second floor, screaming. She disappears. I'm good. I exit the building and I look up to see a group of patrons on top of the tower. They wave, so I hurry in and I begin to climb the stairs with anticipation. The stairwell is dark, but I trust I'm going somewhere beautiful. Where am I? What am I doing? Why did I come here? But then I take my first steps onto the roof. I cannot believe my eyes. Miles and miles of open space. Midnight, the Stars and You begins to play in the distance. And in that moment of clarity, it dawns on me. I'm hooked. And I think to myself, where to next? I love you truly. Life with its sorrow, life with its tears, fades into darkness when I see you near. For I love you truly. Truly, dear. And I think that about does it for the presentation. So thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Sorry, you only just heard the end of our applause there because I didn't realise I'd muted because it was echoing. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Phil.
We've got about 10 minutes of the session left for questions, which is fantastic. So Wayne, do you want to come back in if you can hear us? Put your mic and camera back on. Fantastic, lovely. And we've got our bodies in the room are here, so hopefully you can just about see them. The rest of our presenters from this session. Great, let's crack on with some questions. Thank you so much, everybody. No, you sit there. That's why I'm going to run around with this microphone. Who's got a question? Wonderful. I'm coming over.
Please do. Simon here. Really enjoyed all of them in all their various media. Just struggling to find a question that might apply to everybody. But in some ways, maybe it's not. I mean, just maybe focusing on the Barron's work, which was very rigorous and disciplined, and juxtaposing it with a kind of playful approach. I'm wondering if the role of the random or the role of chance, for instance, like with Darren's, whether it would be things like automatic writing, entering into different quantities, and again, the spectrum may be in reverse to the play people, and back onto the last presentation again, a very disciplined piece that dealt with contingency. So sorry, I can't mention everybody, but if all of you could maybe comment on that.
So on the role of, do you want to just?
Yeah, role of chance, contingency, and random.
Yes, briefly, if I could respond. I walked into the dining room intending to be there at midnight. And I've visited that room maybe 100 times. And this is the only time I've walked into it. There was a couch. I don't know where the couch came from. And that's why I lay down. I wasn't planning to lie down. I walked in and there was a couch, so I lay down. So there is contingency in my experience.
I think like the randomness and discipline intersect too, because like for us, although our work looks quite random, there is somewhat of a structure to it. There are steps that are, we observe where we are. We have a methodology of like kind of just stepping back and observing and feeling your senses, and somewhat similar to what your reflections and your writing, and through that then you access random encounters that lead to the next step. So like our collaborative mapping process, that came about because I had a random conversation with someone, and I was like, oh, I want to talk with people, and let's have a map where people come and like actually interact with us directly rather than us just observing things. And so I think, for us, there is this intersection of push and pull of, if you're too structured, then you feel caged in and you need to get a bit tentacly or something.
Especially when bits and bobs that work with the general public, because you never know what they're going to say or do. So it's like, having that random element of them giving things on the map or engaging with prompts in all sorts of ways. Then we can move on from there in all sorts of directions.
Rick's staying quiet. Wayne or Blake, would you like to come in on that about the role of randomness and chance?
Yeah, I mean, if it's all right, but I'll just come in there. I mean, obviously we're at the very end of being less disciplined in pretty much everything that we do, and that's part of what our sort of modus operandi is really. But I think and I think there's quite an art actually to truly embracing that kind of chaotic randomness and to allowing that. I think it can be quite difficult to kind of immerse oneself in that, but it's something that I think if you can successfully do, I think actually the discipline, I guess I'm always sort of talking about the intersectionality, but I think you can truly, I think it's remarkable about how things can form more of a cohesive thing out of something that is apparently unrelated. I mean, I found it quite interesting in terms of some of the commonalities about each of what we're kind of doing or have been doing. I think there was some definite kind of thread there. So I think that's really interesting, and that really what drives a lot of what we do. Nothing is overly rehearsed, planned. But at the same time, we find that something quite wonderful can often come out of that approach. So I don't know. I guess that's my sort of little ramble observation, Blake. I don't know if you want to come in on that point.
Yeah, could you just repeat the question one more time? I had a hard time hearing it.
Yes, it was about the role of randomness and chance in your work.
Yes. Okay. So as you can imagine, assembling something like a short film does take quite a bit of discipline and focus, but it's a reimagining of my first experience there. And the problem with my practice of exploring abandoned spaces is that I often show up to a place that I've been given the coordinates to, and it has been turned into an Amazon warehouse or something equally as horrific. And so I am taking a chance on traveling all over the world and hoping that the spaces are still there when I show up. And then as far as the actual place goes, I don't know what kinds of ghosts I'm going to run into when I go. I never set a plan. I do not look up the history of the space before I go, because I don't want my imagination to be impacted or affected by preconceived notions of what the space is going to be. So a lot of very mysterious and fun things happen by chance that I can't quite explain. And it isn't until after the fact that I reorganize everything and put it into a narrative structure that hopefully people can somewhat follow.
Any other questions? We've got time for one more. Yes.
So yeah, I just wanted to say to Wayne, you were talking about the king Vulcan was king of Balkan. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because that's very interesting. Because so we live near Workington, which has Vulcan Park in it, and it's said to be derived from the same thing like the king of the god of steel, and there was a lot of rail making in Workington. So I didn't realize that Sheffield was associated with the same god. So maybe that festival could be happening in Workington as well, because our two town cities seem to have the same links. So yeah, I'm interested in
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting observation. I mean, so I found some great source material, particularly from this. I don't know if people can see, but it was quite hard to get hold of. But somebody had written it, I think in the 90s. It says Vulcan from Mount Olympus to Sheffield, and it's got lots of interesting detail here. I mean, just on the outset, it says stand at any suitably high vantage point in Sheffield. Turn your eyes to the city centre and you will see on top of the town hall a statue with upraised left arm, the Roman god Vulcan. Who is Vulcan and why was he adopted as a symbol for the city? And there's so much interesting detail, and I think there's a lot more we can do around that. As I say, I think we're just scraping the kind of very edge by what we've done, but I think we're really interested in developing, and particularly again deepening our understanding of why this Roman god is so closely associated with a city. And just what was amazing as well, from where I'm sat now in my flat, I actually, again, it's one of the synchronicities is that there's an old kind of clock building that used to be the entry to one of the factories. And again, it wasn't until I started that project that I noticed there's two figures in the brickwork, and one of them, would you believe, is Vulcan. So it's just incredible, and I'm really keen to sort of keep pushing and prodding those kind of synchronous things to do with Vulcan. But yeah, thank you for that.
Yes, Workington is really on the northwest coast, so there's a very interesting link of two places with the same god. Yeah.
If I can ask a question that I think does link all the papers. The link with mine is a bit subterranean, because I think that one of the reasons that I was unexpectedly spooked in this beautiful house at night was that I associated it with films and stories similarly cast. But more explicitly, I think in the other presentations, there were stories woven into your experiences of the places. And these are not necessarily your stories. These are stories like Vulcan, Shining, Billy the Seal. So I'm interested in the ways in which these stories outside the places, or outside your expectations, shaped your experience going to this place.
Oh. Yes, a sentence each of us, because we're right at time now. So.
Yes. Go first.
I just wanted to hold the microphone. I think that was kind of part of like the main part of our residency was to get these stories from the like people who were using that area, whether they were residents or visitors or whatever, get their stories about that place. I think that was kind of one of our main things, and then for us to kind of go and try and find some of those stories, find the physical kind of remnants and elements of those stories.
And did the stories change your experience of the places?
For sure.
I'm just curious.
I mean, as someone who had never been to Wales before, I went to it with kind of similar to what Blake was saying. Like, I don't like knowing about places I'm going to before I'm there, so that I can understand the place when I'm there through people and that immediate experience. So definitely colored it and made it alive, I guess.
For me, I've lived in Cardiff for a year, and I didn't really feel any connection to it, but I felt more connected to it that we were there for like 5 days, much more connected to it in those 5 days, hearing all those people's stories and where they went and where they found rest and playing, going visiting those places and seeing all those experiences. I felt a lot more connected to the city than I did when I lived there.
Thank you. Well, we are completely at time. In fact, we've run over very slightly. Even though we had an extra 15 minutes. So. I'm sure we can keep going and going. Thank you so much to all of our presenters online and in the room, and to everyone for listening and for your lovely questions.